Welcome to Watchmaker.com. Today we're counting down the top 10 most important journeys made throughout U.S. history.
On May 21st, 1927, Charles A. Lindbergh completed the first solo non-stop transatlantic flight in history. The grueling 33-hour and 30-minute journey started from Long Island, New York, and ended in Paris, France. The flight was purposefully made incredibly uncomfortable so Lindbergh wouldn't fall asleep, which included restricting Lindbergh to a single tin can under his seat to use the bathroom in. Lindbergh became a truly worldwide celebrity, his accomplishments being recognized for decades. The flight also caused the Lindbergh boom, a worldwide increase in aircraft stocks. While the flight was extremely influential, propelling the world into an era of aviation, it didn't affect United States history specifically as much as the rest of this list.
In the midst of the American Revolution, the colonists were losing pretty badly. The British had won most of the major battles at that point, and they had a much stronger generals and forces, including the Hessian mercenaries. On Christmas night of 1776, George Washington launched a surprise attack on a Hessian fort via a perilous trek across the Delaware River. After jumping the Hessians in their own house, Washington cemented himself as an incredible military figure, giving the revolutionaries a huge morale boost and providing a strategically critical point to launch future attacks. One important fact in the Revolutionary victory: there would be more important battles, and it wouldn't be nearly as well known if they weren't for that one painting of Washington or of farming while he was crossing the river.
Because I like JPEGs.
On December 16, 1907, an armada of 16 U.S. Atlantic Fleet battleships set out on a journey to circumnavigate the globe. The 16 battleships were commissioned by President Theodore Roosevelt, who noticed that earlier that year in July that the U.S. Navy kind of sucked and would get destroyed in any battle against a major European power. The fleet journeyed across the world, a 43,000-mile, 14-month journey that landed in 20 ports in 6 different continents. The fleet showcased the new strength of the U.S. Atlantic Fleet, continuing George Washington's precedent of ore farming on boats. The fleet itself is significant in showing America's journey to becoming a proper world power, but the journey of the fleet was mainly done to show off, placing it relatively low on this list.
On the 7th, 9th, and 21st of March in 1965, 3 marches took place from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery, Alabama. These marches were in protest against the restrictions on black citizens' abilities to vote, placed in opposition of their legal right to vote. They were led mainly by Martin Luther King Jr., one of the most influential civil rights leaders in history, along with many others such as Malcolm X and NBA Youngboy. These marches were incredibly significant as they began to show federal support for the civil rights movement, leading to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The third march was even protected by the military, which is definitely something that still happens all the time with peaceful protests. While there are still more significant journeys and more significant protests from the civil rights movement, these marches were still integral to the progress of civil rights in the 1960s.
November of 1864, William Tecumseh Sherman, a Union Civil War general, marched his troops from Atlanta to Savannah in Georgia, laying waste to everything in his path. Sherman burned farms and homes as well as destroying any railroads or infrastructure that could provide an advantage to the Confederacy. This was an act of total war as well as psychological warfare, as Sherman's marches showed the people of the Confederacy that their government could not protect its citizens from harm at the hands of the Union. Despite this, Sherman didn't actually harm any of the civilians in his marches, because he was just a nice dude. Sherman's march was instrumental in the Union victory of the Civil War, crippling the Confederacy's ability to fight back. While some would say Sherman's acts make him a war criminal, I would argue he was really cool. So his march gets number 6 on this list.
Arriving in November of 1620, a group of religious separatists, later known as the Pilgrims, came from England to the New World aboard a ship called the Mayflower. Upon landing from the 66-day journey across the Atlantic, the Pilgrims established the colony of Plymouth, Massachusetts. A great accomplishment, as we all know Plymouth is the most esteemed place in America, second only to Newark, New Jersey, and Flint, Michigan. The Pilgrims came together to sign the Mayflower Compact, a document that solidified Plymouth as the first self-governed colony in New England, starting a new age of colonization. The Mayflower Compact set the groundwork for all the classic American values: democracy, self-government, 15-lane highways, and Raising Cane's box combo chicken fingers. The Mayflower perfectly represents the start of America and the foundations for what it would eventually become, placing it perfectly in the middle of this list.
In 1832, the Supreme Court case Worcester v. Georgia ruled that Cherokee were a sovereign people, and applying legislation such as the Indian Removal Act of 1830 would be unconstitutional. Despite this, President Andrew Jackson just kind of said no, I guess, and completely ignored the Supreme decision. In case you didn't know, presidents are not supposed to do that. Jackson continued to enforce the Indian Removal Act, which facilitated the forced westward relocations of nearly 100,000 Native Americans from U.S. territory. The path taken by these relocated people was extremely long, with few provided supplies, causing the death of tens of thousands of Native Americans due to exhaustion and starvation. The Trail of Tears remains incredibly significant due to the sheer brutality of the journey, as well as the beginning of a long trend through the centuries of the U.S. destroying the lives of Native people. While the trail was very significant, it missed the top 3 just barely due to its lack of an effect on the general population of the time.
After decades of a Cold War against the Soviet Union, the United States found itself in a race to space as well. The Soviets launched the first man-made satellite, Sputnik, in 1957. From that point on, it became a race between the two superpowers, with JFK promising the U.S. would put a man on the moon by the end of the 1960s. In July 1969, the Apollo 11 mission was launched, bringing Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins on board a shuttle headed for the moon. After 3 days aboard the shuttle, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were the first men to step foot on the moon. Michael Collins stayed on the shuttle and just watched as Aldrin and Armstrong have fun without him. Poor guy. This solidified America as victors of the space race, despite the fact that they kinda did everything else after the Soviets did. The whole landing was televised, making Armstrong and Aldrin massive celebrities. Neil Armstrong's famous quote, something about feet, I don't really remember, lives on as one of the most well-known quotes in human history. The moon landing is one of the most impactful journeys in American history. Ended the space race with the U.S. as victors. It was also a major achievement in both the cultural and scientific fronts of the Cold War.
Number 2. Lewis and Clark Expedition. On January 18, 1803, President Thomas Jefferson told Congress to commission a secret journey, led by William Clark and Meriwether Lewis, to explore the new western frontier gained by the Louisiana Purchase. The goal of this expedition group, called the Discovery Corps, was to create diplomatic relations with the western tribes of Native Americans, expand the fur trade, and to discover the illustrious Northwest Passage, a canal connecting to the Pacific Ocean that was definitely in America and totally not in Canada or anything like that. Lewis and Clark helped strengthen America's claims on the Northwest Territory, improved U.S. mapping and cartography, discovered new natural resources, and strengthened diplomatic relations with the Native Americans. The expedition also paved the way for another significant journey, the Oregon Trail, which would have made the list, but I didn't feel like talking about it. Lewis and Clark's expedition perfectly encapsulates the goals of manifest destiny that America held in the 1800s, constantly striving to increase their land and to reach the Pacific Ocean. Lewis and Clark themselves became famous for exploration, despite the fact that they would have died in like a month if it wasn't for their Native American guide Sacagawea doing all of the work. Honorable mention, Joe Biden going up any flight of stairs.
From the late 1700s to the end of the Civil War in 1865, the Underground Railroad, a network of both natural and man-made pathways through which the slaves escaped from slavery, was operational. Slaves were assisted by people of all backgrounds, former and current slaves, people of different ethnic and religious backgrounds, and anyone who was sympathetic enough to the cause. Slaves escaped to anywhere from Mexico and the Caribbean to Canada and Europe. This network of routes for slaves to escape was a form of widespread civil disobedience, and it lasted for about 70 years. It was an immensely important piece of not just African American history and civil rights, but American history as well, showing resistance to the institution of slavery. Many famous leaders led the Underground Railroad system, one such being Harriet Tubman, Mrs. $20 Bill, Mrs. Free the Slaves. The GOAT herself was the conductor of the Underground Railroad for 8 years, and she is said to have never lost a passenger. The Underground Railroad is by far the most significant journey in United States history. It's such an intriguing and uplifting story, a whole covert operation working to save thousands of slaves, all under the noses of racists that clogged American society of the time. This has been WatchBaker.com. Thank you for watching.